Welcome to our next segment related to Baroque art. In this video we're going to be talking about Italian Baroque painting and sculpture. In our last segment we talked about architecture. So just to recap, the Baroque style is often thought of as a period of artistic style that used exaggerated motion and clear, easily interpreted detail to produce drama, tension, exuberance, and grandeur in sculpture and painting, as well as architecture, literature, dance, theater, and music. This style began around the 1600s in Rome, Italy, and spread to most of Europe. And we will look at some other areas of Baroque. We did look at French Baroque with the Palace of Versailles when we were looking at architecture. And again, the popularity of the Baroque style was encouraged by the Catholic Church, during the Protestant Reformation. So the Counter-Reformation was sort of the reaction of the Catholic Church. They really saw, that art, at least religious art, should communicate religious themes that involved direct involvement with emotion, and you'll see that with Italian Baroque painting. So let's see. So we are still in Italy, and we're going to look at sculpture first. So this is a sculptor named Bernini. And this is his version of David. So hopefully this is familiar to you. We've looked at two other Davids. We've looked at one in the early Renaissance by Donatello. We looked at Michelangelo's version of the David. And now we're looking at Bernini and his Baroque version. So it's a life-size marble sculpture. The sculpture is one of many commissioned to decorate the villa of Bernini's patron, Cardinal, I can't say his name, Scipione Borghese, and this is in your lecture notes, where it still resides today as part of the Galleria Borghese. It was completed in the course of 7 months, from 1623 to 1624. The subject of the work is the biblical David about to throw the stone that will bring down Goliath, which will allow David to behead him. Compared to earlier works on the same thing, notably the David of Michelangelo, the sculpture broke new grounds in its implied movement and its psychological intensity. Bernini was only 24 years old when he sculpted it. So here's a comparison to Michelangelo's David. So when we compare the two, we really see how Bernini shows more movement. His David is caught between two actions where he's about to throw the stone. And so a diagonal line dominates his body, making his stance less stable and more dynamic than than Michelangelo's version. This diagonal composition will become a dominant characteristic of Baroque art. Here's some multiple viewpoints for you to look at. And so, like with most sculpture during this period, engaging multiple pleasing viewpoints, were important. And Bernini knew of Michelangelo's David and wanted to outdo him. So we still have, we're still focusing on the identity of the artist, and now artists are sort of looking towards other artists and getting inspiration from them, but also trying to outdo them and become better than them as well. And when we really look at Bernini's David, we can see that he really does go beyond what Michelangelo did. The stance is a lot more exaggerated, where, Michelangelo had that more relaxed contrapposto, the facial expression. It's very superb, but again, incorporating the sort of classical body or heroic male figure type as well, but definitely much more drama and movement implied in this sculpture. So here's another view, and in this one you really can get a sense of him, almost the tension of the movement, where he's sort of reaching back, and it's just this sort of moment in between where he's about to release the slingshot. So Bernini, with his sculpture of David, shows incredible skill with marble. And, like Michelangelo, he was able to make the stone appear very flesh-like as well. So he was very talented, a very talented sculptor. He does incorporate Michelangelo's terra blita, that sort of look of intense concentration that Michelangelo incorporated into his sculpture and painting. He also has made his David a self-portrait of Bernini, and he is said to have used a mirror to help him aid in sculpting his face. And so some art historians think that this is the idea that Bernini has triumphed over Michelangelo by incorporating his self-portrait into his sculpture. Alright, so this is the sculpture that you do need to know for Bernini. It's located in the Cornararo Chapel in Santa Maria del Vittoria in Rome, and it's known as the Ecstasy of St Theresa. It is a central sculptural group in white marble set in an elevated, set on an elevated stage in the Cornaro Chapel. It was designed and completed by Bernini, and he was the leading sculptor of his day, who also designed the setting of the chapel in marble, stucco, and paint. So he also designed sort of this stage and these other materials to enhance the sculpture. And it really is generally considered to be one of the sculptural masterpieces of the High Renaissance. Sculptural masterpieces of the High Baroque period or the High Roman Baroque period. Here's the exterior view. I should have shown this first of the Santa Maria della Vittoria in Rome. And your AP list includes the facade of this church, so I don't have it in your PowerPoint right now, but I will put it in there. So please make sure you also know the church. But I'm pretty sure they're more interested in the interior and the sculpture done by Bernini, but you still need to recognize this facade. Alright, so here's a closer look. The sculpture seems like it's set in sort of a stage-like or theatrical setting. And again, remember, Baroque unifies the art, so it's not uncommon to see sculpture, painting, and architecture all brought together in one space and enhance each other. So we'll focus on the actual statue, the marble part of it. So we see two central sculptural figures, and one is the swooning nun and the angel with a spear. And this is derived from an episode described by Teresa of Avila. She was a mystical, cloistered Carmelite reformer and nun. In her autobiography, The Life of Teresa of Jesus, which was published between 1515 and 1582, her experience of the religious ecstasy in her encounter with the angel is described as followed. So I'm going to read an excerpt. I saw in his hand a long spear of gold, and at the iron's point there seemed to be a little fire. He appeared to me to be thrusting it at times into my heart, and to pierce my very entrails when it drew out. He seemed to draw them out also, and to leave me all on fire with a great love of God. The pain was so great that it made me moan, and yet so surpassing was the sweetness of this excessive pain that I could not wish to be rid of it. The soul is satisfied now with nothing less than God. The pain is not bodily, but spiritual, though the body has its share in it. It is a caressing of love so sweet which now takes the place between the soul and God, that I pray God of his goodness to make him experience who may think that I am lying. It almost sounds like I read something out of a romance novel. But that's the point of this sculpture, that, and we'll get to it later, this idea of sort of physical love, or this sort of reaction to physical love, is a way to represent a higher love or a higher power or divine power. The group is illuminated by natural light, which filters through hidden windows in the dome on the surrounding stage. and it's also underscored by gilded stucco rays. So these are actually stucco sculptural, and they're gilded in gold to make it look like sun rays. Teresa is shown lying on a cloud, indicating that this is intended to be a divine apparition we are witnessing. So here's a close-up of the angel, and that's piercing her chest. He holds a golden spear, and so Bernini's really exploiting this idea of pleasure and pain. Focusing on the facial expression of St. Theresa, I'm sure you've noticed that her expression is very erotic looking, and so Bernini is adopting the use of sexual imagery to express spiritual ecstasy. And this was a very conceptual and modern notion, and really no one had done this at this point. So it was quite innovative. One thing I want you to note is to the comparison of the drapery and how stylistically it's different for each of the figures. The angel's garment, if we look closer, is more frothy and light, and considered more celestial, while the garment of St. Theresa is more heavy and wet-looking, which is supposed to represent the more earthly. And so this is the idea that St. Theresa is being swept up in the divine, swallowed by her cloud-like garment. Her limp foot, which is so beautifully done right here, indicates she is losing consciousness. So also remember in Michelangelo's version of Mary and his Pietà, remember he used drapery as a way to express emotion, and the idea was that because her face was serene, that her grief was depicted in her drapery. So I'm sure he's gotten this notion from Michelangelo as well. Looking at the other components related to the sculpture, note the many types of colored marble used in the setting. On the right side look here, on the right side there are these onlookers, and they're actually witnessing the scene taking place. They almost look like they're in a theater box or an opera box, and so it's this idea that they're sort of watching this magnificent spiritual experience. They're witnessing it. So when we look here closer at these donors, guys, we see that they're done in high relief, and these are portraits of the donors. These are the male members of the Cornaro family, and are present and shown discussing the event in the boxes as if they're at the theater. So they're sort of looking at each other and conversing with one another. Although the figures are executed in white marble, the other components, the wall panels and the theater boxes, are made from colored marble. Also, when we look closer up towards the vault of the church, we see that the chapel is frescoed with illusionistic cherubs, this sort of cherub-filled sky, and this idea of the descending light of the Holy Ghost allegorized as a dove. Here's a better, wider view of the statue and the chapel, and here you do get a better sense of the cherubs. And I don't know where the dove is. I'm sorry. But anyway, the important part of this is to really see how, sculpture, architecture, and painting all come together in terms of creating almost an installation, a sort of church installation. So really the effects are very theatrical, and that is characteristic of Baroque art. The Cornaro family seeming to observe this scene from their boxes, and the chapel illustrates a moment where divinity intrudes on an earthly body. So it's a very dramatic and theatrical presentation, and this will define what Baroque art will be about: drama, action, movement, and the unity of arts. So here's a wider view for you to take a look at, and you really can see the combination of the stucco and the painted fresco. Here are the cherubs, and then this combination of sculpture and architecture, all into this one sort of religious installation. And so this is, the effect is very theatrical, especially with the Cornaro family seeming to observe the scene from their box. And the chapel illustrates a movement, especially with the scene of St. Theresa, where divinity intrudes on her earthly body. So again, very dramatic and theatrical presentation, and this is really what's going to define what Baroque art is about: drama, action, movement, and the unity of arts. So I'm going to stop here, and I will continue in part 2 and talk about Baroque painting, in particular the artist Caravaggio. So stay tuned.